Good morning. I'd like to begin our discussion of The Tempest. I'm going to start by asking you 3 questions. You can jot these down. Number 1, where is scene 1 set? Number 2, what are the 2 groups of characters involved in scene 1? And number 3, what theme is most prominent in scene 1? By the time we're finished talking about scene 1 here, you should be able to answer all 3 of those questions pretty easily. Okay, so obviously most people are probably too quick to just start reading the dialogue. Please don't forget to read all scene descriptions, so you can see scene descriptions right here, here, and so on. So our first question, what is the setting of the first scene, is answered immediately in the scene description: on a ship at sea. But that's not the only element of the setting. You can imagine 2 very different stories are told. One where a ship sails calmly at sea, and 2 where a ship is tossed by a storm. The continued scene description tells us that this is a ship at sea in distress. The first line, spoken by the master of the ship, probably the captain, to his, it looks like the word boatswain. It's pronounced in the text as bosun, B-O-S-N. The bosun would be responsible for the crew on a ship, and would also be, or might also be, responsible for the cargo on the ship, for the loading and unloading of the cargo. The idea that he is a crew chief, whatever you want to call it, puts him in a place of authority, and that he is in charge of the contents of the ship puts him in an interesting relationship with the other passengers. That might be the answer to the second question. We have the master and the bosun, and then we have a few other characters. On this page we see the interaction of the bosun, the crewman, the shipman, with the other group of characters. We see a few names here: Antonio, A-N-T, Gonzalo, G-O-N, and from a previous page we have Alonso, and on the next page we'll see Sebastian. These 4 men represent the nobility, the aristocrats, and we see the interaction between the bosun and Antonio. We see the bosun say to Antonio right here in line 6 and 7, Bosun says, I pray now keep below. So he's giving Antonio a command. Antonio is a nobleman, probably not inclined to take commands, and he attempts to, Antonio, pardon me, attempts to ignore the Bosun, I guess. He says, where is the master? So he asks, in other words, who's in charge? Sort of like when you've got a complaint with a telemarketer or somebody who you're on the phone with, and they're giving you a hard time or not giving you what you want, and you say, let me speak to your supervisor. In other words, you're beneath me, or you're not qualified to help me. Let me speak to somebody more important than you. That's what Antonio is doing to Bosun right now. But Bosun's response is important. Do you not hear him? You mar our labor. He orders him, keep your cabins. You do assist the storm. In other words, the noblemen, the aristocrats on deck are getting in the Bosun's way. They're getting in the crew's way. This is a terrible storm. The ship is in real danger of sinking, and Antonio wants to play who's the boss. Gonzalo, who we will find out is a mediator. He's slower to judgment. He's going to attempt to intervene here and say, nay, good, be patient. The word good here simply means good fellow. It's short for good sir. He says, nay, good, be patient. And he's addressing the Bosun, right? Be patient. Don't get excited. But even this calm character, Gonzalo, is literally attacked by the Bosun, and he tells him, I'll be patient when the sea is. What cares these roarers for the name of king? This is a great line for a couple. It's a great line, but it's a great line to show why Shakespeare can be difficult to read. All right. If you look, there are words omitted and syntax inverted. Syntax is just word order. So the standard order of words as we would have them, in other words, subject, verb, object. Typically, we would speak in that order. I like baseball, for example. In Shakespeare, the syntax can be inverted, all right, so that he might say something like, baseball, I like. He might even say, if he felt like it, I, baseball, do like. Something like that. Why does he do it? Mostly for meter. This is something we'll talk about at another time, but you may have heard in your discussion of Shakespeare in previous years that Shakespeare's dramas are written largely in what is called blank verse. Blank verse is unrhymed iambic pentameter. We talked about iambic pentameter when we talked about sonnets. All right. It's an unstressed followed by a stressed syllable. And basically they do that throughout the line, alternating stressed syllables. In this particular case, what cares these roarers for the name of king? He might invert syntax in order to achieve that rhythm, that meter. What the standard syntax for this sentence might have been, and the omitted word, right? What is the Bosun saying here? What does what do, pardon me, really would be what he said, right? What do these roarers care for the name of king? Instead, he's got what cares these roarers. Typically, we would say, what do these roarers care for the name of king? All right. The point is, Bosan's saying that the storm outside the ship doesn't care about the king, doesn't care about who's on board. So he orders them again to get to the cabins, to get to their rooms. Silence, he orders them again, trouble us not. This is all very important thematically. You should be considering the interactions between the characters as Shakespeare's way of creating theme. The back and forth between the aristocrats and the Bosun continues. Gonzalo says, remember who you have aboard. In other words, royalty. People who are more valuable and more powerful than you. But the Bosun's response is ego-driven and logically correct. He says, there is no one on board that I love more than myself. He looks at Gonzalo and says, you are a counselor, a wise man. Well, counsel these elements to silence. Use your authority. And he uses the word right there. Use your authority. If you can't, give thanks you have lived so long, and make yourself ready in your cabin for the mischance of the hour, if it so happen. The Bosun in line 12-13 clearly limits the authority of the aristocrats. That little word, exit, is important. It lets us know that Bosun has left the scene. He's stepped off the stage. And so instead now we'll have Gonzalo talking about the Bosun. And he says, methinks, or I think, he hath, just another word for has, I think he has no drowning mark upon him. His complexion is perfect gallows. In other words, Gonzalo's suggesting that this guy looks like he should be hanged. He's just got the look of that kind of a guy. He looks like a real scoundrel. He doesn't look like he's going to drown. He looks like he should be hanged. He just looks like a criminal, for example. And Gonzalo is comforted by this. He's comforted by this because he's basically saying, if looks count for anything, we won't drown right now. We will get safely to harbor. And when we do, this guy is going to be hanged for insubordination. He says, stand fast, good fate, to his hanging. Make the rope of his destiny our cable. This is a beautiful metaphor right there. Enter Bosun again. Continuing orders. Here he's ordering his crew to prepare the ship for the storm. On these next lines, we see Sebastian, yet another aristocrat. We see the same, insubordinate attitude coming from Bosun. Sebastian curses at him, a pox of your throat, you bawling, blasphemous, and charitable dog. Antonio chimes in, hang, cur, hang, you whore's son, insolent noisemaker. We are less afraid to be drowned than you are. I would say almost every other line, students who are unfamiliar with Shakespeare, every other line students who are unfamiliar with Shakespeare get confused. That this line you might be saying, I skipped over, I barely even saw it because I don't know what he's talking about. This is why reading Shakespeare with a teacher is usually more fruitful than reading it on your own. But on line 19, we are less afraid to be drowned than thou art. Why? Does he think they won't drown? No. He's not afraid to die because Antonio believes he's a good person. He believes, I'm a nobleman. You are beneath me. Chances are noblemen go to heaven and servants, etc., go to hell. The mariners on the ship are giving up on line 22, and they exit. Exit means plural characters leaving the stage. Gonzalo, the councilman, recognizes the king and the prince are below deck at prayers. They're praying, recognizing, I guess, that the end is near. And Gonzalo says, let's assist them, for our case is as theirs. So Gonzalo has gone below deck. Sebastian, I am out of patience. In other words, he's losing hope. A confused noise within. A mercy on us, we split, farewell, my wife and children. The ship is sinking. Antonio says, let's all sink with the king. See these little contractions, right? Don't let them confuse you. Let's all sink with the king. If you were to think about how quickly you speak and how many words you omit when you're simply conversing with your friends, how many times we drop R's, how many times we combine the ends of words with the beginnings of the next words, to somebody who was unfamiliar with the language, it might be unintelligible. If you wrote the way you actually spoke, you'd see that many of your words were contracted in these ways. In any case, he says, let's all sink with the king. And look at Sebastian's response. Let's take leave of him. In other words, let's say goodbye to the king. Antonio and Sebastian here seem to be honorable attendants to the Lord. That is a reality which we'll be questioning in the coming scenes. Okay, so Gonzalo says he wishes for a dry death instead of a drowning, and that's the exit. All right, so that's pretty much it for the scene, but I do want us to consider what theme is most prominently conveyed in scene one, and that's question number 3 that we should be able to answer now. So here is a slide from our Tempest PowerPoints the other day, and you can see these few themes that we'll be talking about throughout. And maybe if you thought about this for a second, you might be able to come up with an answer. What is the most prominent theme displayed in scene 1? Hopefully, you were able to take from the scene the ideas of power, authority, and rebellion. These ideas will be continued, will be discussed throughout The Tempest, But the first scene in Shakespeare typically establishes the most prominent theme. If you remember Macbeth, the first scene was in a deserted place, a field out in the wild somewhere. Um, this is before we hear anything about Macbeth or the battles or anything, or his plan to kill Duncan. This is long before any of that. But we see in the first scene of Macbeth the witches conjuring some evil spell, hovering over their cauldron, and basically calling upon evil spirits to sort of change Macbeth, all right, or influence him anyway, all right. But that first scene in Macbeth, if you remember, was very dark, supernatural, and evil, which is largely the tone of Macbeth. In the same way, Shakespeare establishes the theme of power, authority, and rebellion in this first scene of The Tempest. The fact that the ship is in the midst of a tempest or a storm, the ship, I would guess you might see, is serving as a metaphor for power and authority. That the storm itself is, in a manner of speaking, the rebellion. The ship is power and authority. That the tempest will upset the balance of power and authority. Okay, so that's about all for scene 1. In case I haven't mentioned this already, your homework over the weekend is vocab 34. We'll have a quiz on Monday. Don't forget, we've got thesis meetings after school today. If you are scheduled, I will be back, so I will be here this afternoon for thesis meetings. We'll meet in room 215, and of course, thesis meetings will continue next week. All right, everybody, have a great day. Enjoy your weekend.